In a dramatic turn of events, late Friday evening, then-President Donald Trump announced the suspension of proposed tariffs on all Mexican imports after the U.S. and Mexico reached a last-minute agreement on immigration enforcement. The surprise decision came just hours before a midnight deadline that threatened to upend North American trade and plunge relations between the two nations into economic uncertainty. The threat of dispute began when President Trump declared in May that the United States would impose escalating tariffs on Mexican goods, starting at 5% and increasing monthly up to 25%. Unless Mexico took significant steps to stem the flow of undocumented migrants crossing its northern border into the U.S., the announcement sent shockwaves through the global economy, rattled markets, and alarmed American businesses, particularly in sectors heavily reliant on cross-border trade such as automotive, agriculture, and retail. Trump's plan aimed to pressure Mexico into curbing the tide of Central American migrants who were making their way through Mexican territory to seek asylum in the United States. Trump argued that Mexico had long failed to do its part in immigration enforcement and that economic leverage was necessary to spark action. The 11th hour dialist, the clock ticked closer to the deadline. A U.S. delegation led by Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard and other officials for multiple days of intensive negotiations in Washington. The talks were, by many accounts, tense and uncertain. Late Friday, Trump tweeted that the tariff threat had been indefinitely suspended due to Mexico's new commitments to help stem the flow of migrants. The agreement included several key provisions: deployment of Mexico's National Guard. Mexico pledged to deploy 6,000 members of its newly formed National Guard to its southern border with Guatemala, a major transit point for migrants from Central America. Expansion of migrant protocols. Mexico agreed to expand the implementation of the Remain in Mexico policy, officially known as the Migrant Protection Protocols (MPP), which requires asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their claims are processed in U.S. immigration courts. Joint cooperation efforts. Both countries agreed to enhance their cooperation in breaking up human smuggling and trafficking networks, including closer intelligence sharing and law enforcement collaboration. While the details of the deal were initially vague, Trump hailed it as a great deal for both the U.S. and Mexico. He praised Mexico for stepping up enforcement and claimed victory for his unorthodox negotiating style. Political reactions to the last-minute agreement were mixed and intensely political. Supporters of the administration, especially immigration hardliners, applauded Trump for using economic threats to extract concessions from Mexico without having to follow through with damaging tariffs. They saw it as further evidence that Trump's aggressive, America First strategy worked. Critics, however, argued that Trump had manufactured a crisis and then claimed credit for resolving it. Some pointed out that Mexico had already been taking many of the steps outlined in the agreement. Before the tariff threat, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer accused Trump of performing policy by tweet and tantrum, while several business groups expressed relief but warned about the unpredictability of using tariffs as a diplomatic weapon. Even some Republicans were uneasy with the approach. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, a key figure on trade issues, had warned that tariffs on Mexico would devastate U.S. farmers and urged the president to find another way. Economic impact avoided. For now, had the tariffs gone into effect, the economic impact would have been swift and far-reaching. Mexico is the United States' largest trading partner, with over $350 billion in goods flowing northward annually. Many American industries rely on integrated supply chains that cross the border multiple times during production, particularly in the automotive and electronics sectors. Economists warned that even a 5% tariff would act as a tax on American consumers and businesses, potentially raising prices on everything from fruits and vegetables to cars and appliances. The ripple effect could have slowed economic growth, roiled markets, and further strained an already fragile U.S.-China trade war situation. For now, those fears have been put on hold. Markets responded positively to the news of the suspension, with futures rising and investors expressing cautious optimism. What comes next? Despite the apparent breakthrough, many questions linger. Critics worry that the deal lacks enforceable benchmarks and may not lead to sustained changes in migration patterns. Moreover, Trump has warned that the tariffs could still be reimposed if Mexico doesn't follow through. He stated, "If we see Mexico is not living up to the agreement, we can always go back to the tariffs." The episode underscores the increasingly transactional and unpredictable nature of U.S. foreign policy under Trump. While the tariff threat may have brought Mexico to the table quickly, it also risked damaging long-term diplomatic trust and highlighted the volatility of economic brinkmanship. For Mexico, the deal avoided a potentially catastrophic blow to its economy, which is heavily dependent on exports to the United States. But it also sets a precedent where domestic policy decisions may be shaped under external economic threats from its northern neighbor. As the immigration debate continues in Washington, and as the 2020 presidential election looms on the horizon, Trump's use of tariffs as a bargaining chip will likely remain a contentious and powerful tool in his political arsenal.